welcome to this week's episode of the Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Firstly, as per usual, big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented. Certainly it seems like there was a few more than usual watching last week's episode of the show. I'm guessing it's partly down to the fact that Hunter Lang were obviously quite happy with my comments and my reviews, and kindly retweeted or quoted my tweet, shall we say. Guessing that probably brought in a few more viewers. Also seemed to have brought in a few more subscribers, which was really cool. So if you're one of those new subscribers, then big thank you for subscribing, and hope you'll hang around for the ride, as they say. If you've been around the block for a while and been with me for quite some time, then good to have you with me and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's really cool. Obviously, of course, the usual disclaimer that any comments I make are wholly my own and have no bearing or relevance to the company I work for. Anyway, this week's episode of the show, we're sort of carrying on with the kind of new theme, although not quite so new per se, if you see what I mean. I was kind of given a couple of samples of newish releases from Dewar's. I think one was 2019 and the other one was last year, I believe, and I thought, good opportunity to do an episode of the show on them, because I have a number of samples that were kind of left over from the 2015 World Whisky Awards, so they've been around for a while, so the juice may well not be exactly the same as what's in the current bottle, because obviously we know that the blends are made in vast quantities and batches and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, but I thought it's a good opportunity to have a real dig into the Dewar's range and see what they're all about. I mean, as you know, I've always been a big fan of blended whiskies. I think a lot of people kind of look down their noses at them and think they're less superior. Less superior, is that the right way of saying it? Anyway, they're not as good as a single malt because they're a blend, and I personally argue to a certain extent almost the other way around. The idea of a blended whiskey is to create something that doesn't exist within nature, bring together a number of components, and hopefully it will create something that's greater than the sum of its parts. That, of course, is the ideal scenario, and of course, as we well know, people like John Glaser and so on and so forth that have really lifted the art of blending. But what about the big boys? I mean, and Dewar's, as we're looking at today, are certainly, one of the big boys. They are a huge company. They produce, I don't know, millions of litres of whiskey every year. And the whole blended market, as you well know, is dominated by these big names, Dewar's, Grant's, Johnny Walker, etc., etc. And they're all vying for the same sort of slice of the pie. They're all got to keep reinventing. They've got to keep bringing out new adverts. I mean, they're a marketing monkey's dream at the end of the day. The adverts that and all the strap lines and the sort of the boxes covered in all these kind of quotes and stuff. It really does get sort of. And you can see, you see why they do it, because that's the marketplace they exist in, and they have to, should we say, play the evil game, so to speak. But anyway, as we well know, marketing, frippery, packaging, it's all, at the end of the day, completely irrelevant, because it's the juice in the bottle that counts. It's like, is your product, good enough to sort of stand up to scrutiny? And this is obviously what we're going to be looking at today. Anyway, so John Dewar and Sons, to give the company its full name, was founded in 1846 by the eponymously named John Dewar, who had got into the industry sort of prior to that. I mean, he was, like most of the blends, they were initially created by shops, by merchants, and certainly his background was in sort of like a wine and whiskey merchant shop, and eventually the company sort of was passed down, I suppose, for want of a better word, to the eponymous Tommy Dewar, who was one of these kind of larger than life characters that really sort of pushed the the brand, shall we say, into sort of like the public consciousness. Apparently, he set out to visit 26 countries in 2 years in 1892. Now, you know, I mean, nowadays 26 countries, easy. You know, but you know, we're talking sort of, you know, early Victorian times. You know, trains travelling at snail's pace, and likewise with, I mean, you know, it probably took you sort of 2 days to travel from, say, Edinburgh to London, for argument's sake. So you know, that's pretty damn good going. And of course, he was obviously promoting his brand, and sort of everywhere he stopped off, he was, you know, putting sales teams together and all this kind of stuff. And so, you know, late 1800, early 1900s, it was a big brand. And of course, yeah, as we know with the whiskey industry, there was ups and downs, and eventually the company itself merged in 1915 with one of its rival companies, James Buchanan. They eventually consolidated into DCL, basically back in 1925, which then became Diageo after merging with UDV and Grand Met in 97. So it was then hived off. It was then sold off to Bacardi because of competition concerns, and it's been in the hands of Bacardi ever since. And the company itself owns a number of distilleries. Certainly the most well known is obviously Aberfeldy, which I think is the home of Dewar's whiskey, in inverted commas, and obviously plays a large part within the creation of the blend. But according to their marketing guff, in actual fact their blend is made up of over 40 different malts and grain spirit. And you think, well, yeah, that's an impressive amount, but then you think, well, is that a bit too much? You know, have you got too many ingredients here? You know, is this going to sort of, nothing going to stand out? Is it going to be rather homogeneous possibly? Sometimes, as they say, less is definitely more. But anyway, we can't prejudge. The only way we can figure that one out is to actually taste the whiskey. So I think I've waffled enough. So let's have a look at today's wine. I'm still in love with you. Right, okay, so eagle-eyed viewers amongst you will notice that I am missing probably the main bottling, the Dewar's White Label, which is probably their biggest selling whiskey, but unfortunately they didn't enter that one into the 2015 World Whiskey Awards. So anyway, we'll have to live without that, and I'm sure that's we'll be able to sort of tell what the character of the whiskey is like without it. Anyway, so we're going to kick off with the 12-year-old. Bottled at 40%, retailed for about 30 quid. So, you know, it's not a bad price, I suppose, for a 12-year-old whiskey. Then we're going to move on to the 15-year-old, again bottled at 40%. Apparently, according to the advertising blurb, this was created to be a lighter, sweeter blend, and it was the first whiskey to be created by current blender Stephanie McLeod, who's won inordinate amounts of awards for being a good blender. So we're expecting good stuff from that. Then we're going to move on to the 18-year-old, which again, slightly disappointingly, is bottled at 40%. Hits the shelves at about 70 quid. You would have thought that by the time you're doing this, you would at least have got up to 43%, maybe even 46%, but no, unfortunately not. Again, as we well know, so many of the blends are welded to 40%, which is again all tied up with the duty rates and the pricing and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, that's by the by. Then we're going to look at what they call the Signature, again disappointingly bottled at 40%, no longer available. This was originally created to be to go up against Johnnie Walker Blue Label, so one imagines that it's got a very similar age profile to the spirits that go into Johnnie Walker Blue Label, and it's been subsequently replaced by a 25-year-old, which again gave the marketing monkey something to crow about, saying, oh, Dewar's is going back to page statements, or whatever they said. honestly. Anyway, so Johnny Walker, that's around about what, 130, 150 quid. I think the current 25-year-old is about 185. So again, we're expecting, you know, if not fireworks, we're expecting something special from that particular bottling. Then we're going to move on to, you know, this is a bit of a weird way around, but I mean, because these are finishes, I thought these are probably going to be better at the end. We're looking at the 8-year-old Caribbean Smooth. Now, I thought that was a dance. Oh no, that's American Smooth. Anyway, so this is the Caribbean Smooth, so it's 8 years old. Again, bottled at 40%, and it's been finished in ex-rum casks. Don't know how long for, but could be interesting. And the one that I actually really was looking forward to tasting is the one they called the Illegal Smooth. Now, we chuckled about that one, didn't we? Because it's finished in ex-mezcal casks, which, now technically, as far as I'm aware, isn't actually illegal. I mean, you can finish your whiskey in whatever you like. It's only the Scotch Whisky Association that has an issue with what you do with it, and as far as I'm aware, they only outlawed cider casks, so maybe they should have done an illegal cider cask finish. But anyway, maybe they're, because it's ex-mezcal cask, maybe it's they're using casks that were originally used by the illegal mezcal company, possibly. So maybe they are, you know, play on words, if you see what I mean. But anyway, as we said, you know, all this sort of naming, marketing frippery is all completely irrelevant. I'm really quite looking forward to that, you know, because it's a bit different, and it's like, whew, what are these sort of like old dinosaur companies doing something a bit weird and wonderful? Well, we'll see if it worked, won't we?
Well, then you change the tune, a heart.
Right, okay, so let's kick off with the 12-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? It's pleasant, dusty, slightly sort of herbal. It's got quite a sort of old mint, possibly. You know, not fresh mint, but sort of slightly dried mint, I guess. There's a little bit of thyme. There's a bit of an industrial note there. It's almost kind of cardboardy. It has its plus points and it has its minus points. I think it's certainly not absolutely blowing me away. It's certainly not the you know, probably not the worst blended whiskey I've ever come across. It's balanced. There's a relatively good balance between the malt and the grain. I can certainly get the kind of crisp, slightly herbal grain notes coming through. And I suppose that's the point. You know, they've used one of those slightly more industrial spirits. I mean, well, if you're blending 40 odd different malt and grain, you know, well, you're only going to have what, a possibility of what, 4, maybe 5 different grains. So you're looking at well over 30 odd different malts. So there's going to be some Macduff or some Deanston or some Dufftown or something like that in there to give it that kind of natural character, as they say. Anyway, so it's an okay nose. Let's see what the pal's like. It's a little bit watery. I mean, it's 40%. Bit of spice on the finish. It's a bit flat. Now, is that because they've used so many sort of raw materials that it's made it slightly homogeneous, or is there some caramel at work? Difficult one there. I don't get the trademark caramel bitterness, but the trouble is, this is one of these big blends, and you'll never put it past them. I mean, if this was Johnny Walker, knowing how sort of liberal, shall we say, Diageo tend to sort of throw the caramel about, you know, you would be sort of pretty much odds on that there was. Anyway, so setting the caramel issue aside, it's okay. There's nothing special about it. It's, yeah, I suppose if you paid 30 quid for it, you know, it's not dreadful, shall we say, but it's not sort of going to sort of set your pants on fire at the end of the day. So it's, yeah, what it is.
I will break out to get back to the start.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the 15-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Well, yeah, I guess it is a little bit lighter than the 12. Certainly getting a little bit more of that slightly boiled sweet sherry note. Again, there's that slight industrial hard barley, but it's not quite so in your face, I suppose. There's a touch of honey, there's a little bit of orange. Again, there's a sort of flatness to it. It's not evocative, it's not effusive. There is a flatness there, and again, it's a question of, is it because of the amount of components, or are, again, we looking at a bit of caramel being used here? Difficult to say, really, at the end of the day. I mean, from first sort of looking at the colour, you would have thought not. Again, a little bit of roughness, but there's a little bit of sweetness, so yeah, okay, the balance is okay. Touch of grain as well, so it's got a fairly hidden grain component. So I'm guessing that there's a little bit more malt to grain here, but you know, again, balanced. See what that's like. Soft, flat, somewhat slightly homogeneous. I don't get the feeling of caramel. I don't get any of that trademark caramel bitterness. It doesn't actually feel as flat as what the nose, but I'm not getting a great deal of anything. Yeah, all right, there's a bit of malt, there's a bit of toffee possibly, there's a bit of honey, but it really is quite homogeneous at the end of the day. Yes, light, but you know, I so far I think personally my preference is with the 12.
Heart is broken. My heart is broken.
Okay, so let's move on to the 18-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Deep, quite honeyed, got some maturity, malty, touch of cold tea, mature oak, a little bit of violet. A bit more peat coming through on this particular bottling, or should we say a bit more, actually some peat. Certainly didn't pick up any peat on the other two. Fleshy, pulped, sort of almost pulped kind of apricot, a little bit of salt. Yeah, okay, that's not a bad nose at all. Like I said, it's got a lovely maturity to it. Again, it's not overly complex, but it's certainly got a lot more going on for it than the 12 and the 15. So I actually think this is not a bad nose whatsoever. In actual fact, it's yeah. Let's see what that's like. Quite woody, malty, a bit short, got some pleasant maturity, not quite as complex as the nose would lead you to believe, it has to be said. Again, quite coastal, bit of peat, a little bit of violets. I'm guessing there may well be a touch of Old Bamore sort of in that blend, probably not an awful lot, but I just seem to be picking up on that. Good spicy aftertaste. I mean, 70 quid. I think if the palate had lived up to the promise of the nose, I would have certainly said, yeah, no problem at all. And like I said, these are all from, you know, well, 2014. So we're all, you know, these are all sort of like, you know, quite old, and maybe, like I said, they don't represent the juice that's currently in the bottle of 18-year-old. But either way, you know, I think that the palate just didn't quite live up to the nose, and Bit of a shame there, I think.
That it's over. I'm out of love, so
Right, okay, so let's move on to the signature. So, like I said, this is no longer available. It's been replaced by the 25-year-old. So I'm guessing we're looking at spirits of, you know, around about that sort of age. So let's hope for some fireworks, shall we? Dense, malty, fragrant, obvious maturity, quite dusty. I suppose the one thing is that it's not sort of overly oaky. The problem I had with, or have, shall we say, with the Johnny Walker Blue Label is that it's overly oaky. It seems like they obviously put the blend together and shoved it back into first fill bourbon casks, and incidentally, it's quite funny. That's one of the marketing strap lines for this lot, in the fact that they go, it's been double matured for extra smoothness. Oh dear God. Yes, all right, they're not lying. Yes, that they basically blend. They then put the blend back into cask to marry, which is not unusual. I mean, I guess a lot of the blends, again, sort of, it's all about saving time, saving money, getting your product on the shelf cheaper, making probably more money, and so it's, you know, it's blended in tank and then bottled from there. So, all right, yeah. So they're not lying about the fact they're putting it together and resting it in cask, but yeah, double matured for extra smoothness. Oh dear. Anyway, it's old wood, so it's not so sort of obvious youngish kind of wood, or, you know, oak that like the Johnny Walker. It's definitely got some mature spey kind of feeling to it. There's a touch of citrus, leather, a little bit of dusty tobacco, peat. That's a lovely nose. It's a lovely nose. It's quite restrained. It's elegant. It's laid back. No fireworks, but it's a lovely nose. And I think, you know, if you had picked this up for, yeah, about 100 quid, then, you know, it's not a bad whiskey at all. Again, like I said, I think it could have done with being bottled at 46%, and really, as we all know, you know, whiskies of this kind of age statement, this kind of calibre, you know, really there's no excuse for bottling at 40%, just to save a few bob, you know. I think, yes, if this had been bottled at 46%, punchier nose, more intensity, but still, yeah, pleasant. Let's see what that palate like. That's a lovely palate, it has to be said. Elegant, dusty, mature, old honey, old wood, little bit of peat. It's got a little astringent peat note, just pokes through there. Citrus, almost kind of sub cognac-y kind of dried fruits. Again, a little bit of spice. Again, that would have been just so damn good if that had been bottled at 46%. That would have just lifted those spices. It would just increase the intensity. And like I said, for the want of a few extra quid on a bottle that's retailing for 130 quid, really it's criminal that it's not done. And that was a lovely palate, a really gorgeous palate. And yet you keep the only thing that it just says to me is that could have been so much more. But there you go. That's life, isn't it?
my heart is broken in two.
Right, okay, so time for a bit of Caribbean Smooth. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? A lot of rum. Very rummy. Lots of dried fruit, sweet dried fruit, tropical fruit, vanilla, pineapple, apricot. Not really getting a great deal of anything else, it has to be said. There's a bit of barley, there's a bit of a crisp graininess, but it's one of those sort of noses. I can see people loving this because they're going, oh, that's gorgeous, that's lots of, it's big, it's effusive. I mean, it is only 40%, but it seems to pack a bit more of a punch in actual fact. You know what, you know, it's a little bit confected at the edges, but you know what, I actually like this. I think this is a lovely whiskey. It's not going to appeal to everybody, and it's probably a more mass market appeal. You know, as we well know, the UK sort of consumer does seem to like things a little bit more sweeter, and it certainly has that sort of sweetness, that softness, and of course they're promoting it as being, you know, smooth. The amount of times that people ask for a smooth whiskey, well, there you go. You go, well, there you go. It's a smooth whiskey. It says so on the label. Got to be. All right, sorry, canning the cynicism here. Anyway, back to the whiskey. Actually, it's a pretty simple nose. Like I said, it's very much dominated by the finishing cask, but in actual fact, I really like this. Let's see what the powers are. Again, the palate is very much the same, very rum orientated, a little bit short, maybe a bit more sort of grain coming through on the aftertaste, but it kicks off with, you know, a large chunk of juicy, rummy, dried fruits. It's again slightly confected, slightly sugary on the mid palate. Maybe there's a touch of barley. I'm not getting a huge amount of malt character, but you know, it's simple. But it kind of delivers, if you see what I mean, and it's a sort of, you know, it's a kind of, it's almost like a kind of a guilty secret, isn't it? It's sort of like, you know, you've got all these wonderful bottles of whiskey, and then hidden behind them you've got the Dewar's, you know, Caribbean Smooth, you know, and it's sort of like, oh, well, I'll have a drop of that every now and again. It is a bit of a dirty little secret. Sorry, Stephanie. But you know what, I quite like it. Right, okay, finally we're on to the Illegal Smooth, the mezcal finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? That's quite an interesting nose, actually. That works really well. I'm getting sort of like, you know, malt character. I'm getting honey, barley, but then you're getting a touch of lime, some pulped white fruit, a little bit of herbal smoke. It's got an edginess, but it's got a balancing sweetness as well. It's another one of those kind of dirty little secrets. It's fun. I mean, good God, you know, you think of, you know, companies like Johnny Walker and Diageo and DCL and Dewar's and Grant's and all that, and you think of fusty old corporate companies, and then suddenly they do something like this, and you think, oh, that's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? And you know what? I have to say this is probably my favourite of the lineup. I mean, this really is quite unique. It's interesting. It's different. It's something, you know, it's actually rather good. And it's only about 30 quid, you know. And so if you had said 30 quid for that, or the 12-year-old, you know, I'd have this every day of the week. Yeah, see what the pass on. Soft, smoky, pulped white fruit, barley, fresh, citrus, lime, lovely mezcal-y finish, really well balanced, touch of sort of grain coming through right on the finish. I really like that. That is pretty impressive for 30 quid. And you know, it has the sort of like a kind of the sort of doubling effect of sort of like introducing, you know, customers or, you know, people to mezcal. The original, you know, ideally they would never have even considered it. Now you've got a whiskey that's finished in a mezcal cask, and you've got the mezcal notes that certainly come through. You know, maybe it will help or encourage people to try mezcal, because it's such a wonderful spirit. Yeah, so hats off to Dewars. I mean, you know, that is very, very good and a load of fun.
Promise you this, darling.
Right, okay, so that's on today's episode of the show. Well, I don't think I'll be getting any retweets from Dewars somehow, but, you know, it's like I said, you know, I like to think of these reviews are kind of fair. You know, at the end of the day, I have no axe to grind with Dewars. I have no allegiance to Dewars or any other whiskey at the end of the day. It's just my opinion. If you agree with it, then great. If you don't, then you don't. It's fine. Don't mind, you know. If I'm going to sort of do these episodes of the show, then I'm obviously going to put myself in the firing line, and I'm sure that sort of like Dewars couldn't give a monkeys about sort of, you know, one man's opinion. The 12-year-old, yeah, it was all right. It's 30 quid, you know. It's a blended whiskey. It's got a good malt content, but it really was quite bland actually at the end of the day. I was expecting a lot more from the 15-year-old, and it was really a big disappointment at the end of the day. It just didn't really say anything to me. I mean, you know, that the palate was very homogeneous. I don't think there was any caramel in there. I think that maybe Stephanie had kind of like said, right, we're not putting any caramel with this bugger. But equally, the whiskey itself was just lacked any real character at the end of the day. It was a whiskey, generic whiskey, you know. And frankly, even though it's only 45 quid, there's so many better options for 45 quid. The 18-year-old, well, it was a tale of two halves at the end of the day. The nose was really, really good, really intriguing, but it just flattered to deceive, shall we say. The palate just did not live up to the nose whatsoever, which again was really disappointing. And at 70 quid, you know, the last thing you want to do is be just disappointed by a whiskey, and unfortunately, you know, I was, and that's got nothing to do with the fact that it's a blend. It's got nothing to do with the fact that it's a big blended company. It's all I can do at the end of the day is evaluate what is in my glass. Everything else is a complete and utter irrelevance, because that's all that matters. And I'm afraid, again, the 18-year-old was a disappointment. The signature, now the signature was impressive. That was good. Again, Dewars don't get off scot-free here. Yes, it was good, but it could have been so much better. Bottle the damn thing at 46%. Give it that extra bit of punch to it, and that would have been so much better. It has to be said. Obviously, it's not available anymore, and I don't know what the ABV of the 25-year-old is, but I hope to God they've bottled it at something other than 40%. And the Caribbean Smooth, well, like I said, it's a bit of a dirty secret. It's fun. It's suddenly sort of like a case of, what the hell are they doing? This fusty old, you know, behemoth of a whiskey company is suddenly sort of like, you know, producing, you know, having a bit of a brain fart at the end of the day. It's like, whoa, let's release an 8-year-old, you know, wholly sort of consisting of rum character. And yeah, it was pretty one-dimensional at the end of the day, but you know, that it was fun, and it's not too expensive just to have a bit of fun. Bonus. And the mezcal finish, the Illegal Smooth, well, you know, in all of this lineup, it was probably the most interesting bottling that I've tasted. I mean, you know, you look at it on paper and you think, oh, bloody gimmick, you know. It's a case of the SWA have now allowed mezcal casts, so somebody's got to start off the whole kind of mezcal finishing malarkey. But you know what? It worked, and it was fun. And at the end of the day, you know, it's not too expensive, so it's a load of fun for not a great deal of money. I mean, what more do you want at the end of the day? Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. Like I said, I don't think I'll be getting any love from Dewars, which is a bit of a shame. But there you go. They probably don't care. Until next week, no idea what I'm going to be doing next week. I'll probably figure it out sometime around about midweek. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. Also have to say it's good dramming and good afternoon.